Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I'll be going over the best and most notable ships and ship accessories added to Star Trek Online in 2024. As always, chapters to each topic are listed down below. 2024 has been a great year for ships. In total, we got 24 new ships, 2 of which were promotional, 8 lockbox, 4 event, and 10 C-store. And thankfully for our wallets, the gambling ships were pretty underwhelming this year, whereas the event and C-store ships ended up being quite stellar. Now, for the ships we got this year, here's some other data for y'all. 15 of the 24 ships were Federation. I know that's really surprising. The KDF and Romulans each got 1 ship with the Dyson Science Destroyer bundle, and the poor Jemadars, well, their only appearance was through their elements on the Khitomer Alliance Rex Pilot Escort, which was the 2024 anniversary event ship. Hopefully 2025 marks a change for the Jemadar, as the last actual Jemadar ship was the legendary Jemadar attack ship released all the way back in April of 2022, almost 3 years ago. And class-wise, 11 of the ships this year were Science, 6 Engineering, and 7 Tactical. 5 of these ships were carriers, with there being a full 2-bay carrier for each class, along with a single-bay dreadnought for both Engineering and Science. And for specialization seats, unsurprisingly, Miracle Worker made the most appearances by being on 13 of the 24 ships this year. Intel followed with 10, Temporal with 9, Command with 8, and Pilot with 5. But with those stats out of the way, let's take a look at some ships. First up is the best premium ship, and while the year overall felt a bit underwhelming, especially the start of the year with the Deuter stat giving us the active EPS management starship trait, a trait that, when used, is going to nuke your EPS or power transfer rate, which effectively is crippling your energy weapon damage. That was an absolutely stunning trait to start the year out. But even with that and the other mediocre ships that we got throughout the year, there were a few that ended up performing perfectly fine. The Orion Devar, that's got a temp intel spec combo on it. It's not a ship that you see used often, but for some side builds, that's a pretty good combo. The Herogen Predator, that also ended up being pretty good, though the trait on it does have a flaw in that it will activate as soon as you go into Red Alert, even if you go into Red Alert during, say, a briefing phase. The Ariori, that's a good ship, but it just ended up being too close to the Vaudouar Juggernaut and the Legendary Avenger. The Obina has promise. It really depends on what happens with that console, because there is some issues with it that need to be addressed. And then there's the Credence. And of the 5 that I have marked here, there's only one that I feel is worthy of the award of being the best premium ship, and that is the Credence Miracle Worker Dreadnought Cruiser. The Credence has a 5-3 weapon setup, a Commander Miracle Worker, and a Lieutenant Commander Temporal Operative spec seat, a hangar bay, and the ability to run up to 8 isomags. It's a solid ship, but not the best. But what makes it worthy of this award is its accessories, specifically the dilithium transporter console. I discussed this quite a bit in my meta breakdown on this earlier this year, but this console has become a staple on many high-end DPS, support, and carrier builds. The passive on this console provides 76% power transfer rate and 28.5 drain expertise skill. And for the clicky, it is a buff to yourself and up to 12 allies within 10 kilometers for 20 seconds that will provide immunity to subsystem offline. It will disable weapon power cost. It will provide 15% haste for energy weapons, and then it will add a proc to energy and projectile weapons to do radiation damage. The only downside to this console is the horrendous 2-second activation time it has, which when timed poorly can prevent your weapons from firing for 2 seconds. That part of the console can be extremely frustrating, and I really wish the devs would stop giving us abilities with such long activation times. Now, damage-wise, the damage portion of this console will stack if you have teammates running it. The current DPS records are now often done with at least 3 to 4 of these consoles used between the DPS player and the supporting team. But it is also very important to note here that if you're using it in a supported environment, you want to make sure to use this console before you launch pets, because the pets will be buffed up quite a bit by it, and they'll do way too much damage. Now, in your parser, you're going to see this show up as dilithium laced weaponry, and you can see on Cheop's record run of almost 7 million DPS in Hive Space Elite, he had almost a million DPS from the multiple stacks of dilithium laced weaponry that was applied to him from himself and the supporting team. Now, for carrier builds, that radiation proc can buff your pet damage up quite substantially. If you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend you join the Builds Discord and ask about it in the carrier section. And if you want to learn more about this console, I'll also include a link to my meta breakdown video of it down below. Next up is the best event ship of 2024. And this was a really great year for event ships in STO. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that this was the best year for event ships ever in STO's history. Every single event ship we got this year ended up being insanely good. But when I take a step back and look at what is going to have a lasting impact, that is both the Ilios and Vovin for their consoles. As such, I'm giving both the award here. Both have consoles that we're going to be talking about for the foreseeable future. Vovin brought us a console with a 20-kilometer teleport and 25% console cooldown reduction every 30 seconds, which is huge, especially in combination with unconventional systems, enabling us to spam consoles at a crazy rate. And for the Ilios, that console provides haste, crit chance, and severity for weapons, along with some power buffs and bridge officer cooldown reduction. And the haste on this is interacting with experimental weapons and torpedoes, making it highly desirable for weapons-based builds. The only downside to these two ships is that they're not going to be available again for some time. Hopefully we see DECA shorten the time between these events and their buyouts, and these ships being put into stores like Muds or Phoenix. Next up is the best C-Store or Zen ships of 2024, and honestly, this is a pretty hard category. Basically, every ship in the 14th and Heritage bundles is bringing quite a bit of value to the table, as are some of them in the Dyson bundle. So, of the 10 ships that released in 2024 into the Zen store or the C store, the only one that I didn't like was the Kardashev. That was the only ship where I just hated flying it. Every other ship here, I thought the value it provided, was good. The Lola Intel Dyson Science Destroyer, this has a really good EPG console on it that is not getting the attention it deserves. Like if you're an EPG player, pick that Lola up. And these Dyson Science Destroyers, you can use your event campaign coupons on them. So, go ahead, pick that up. The Rallis, you can set up a decent size ship on it. For the Heritage bundle, the Achilles, that's got the Hexa cannons on it, which I talked about in my meta breakdown. It's also got a pretty decent console on it here, the Micro Quantum Torpedo Phalanx Array. Now, for some reason, this console will mess up and show every single trait you have on its tooltip here, but the intended effect of the power buffs and then the torpedoes it launches, that is pretty effective. So if you're looking for a good console that fires torpedoes, definitely take a look at the Achilles. And if you're looking for an experimental weapon, that Achilles experimental weapon beats everything else out there right now. The Premonition, this is a ship that I know people weren't too happy with, but the Gemini device console off of this is actually pretty good. So the Gemini device console, the passive on it is exotic damage, whatever. But then the clicky is going to summon in 2 copies of the Enterprise F, which will do a good bit of damage. And most importantly, it's going to give you 20% weapon firing cycle haste for 30 seconds when you activate the console. And this haste also affects experimental weapons like the hexacannons. So that is a pretty good console to have on hand, especially if you're using experimental weapons. The Typhon, that's got a trait on it that basically gives you a 3rd hangar bay. So for carrier players, that's a bit of value there. And for the 14th anniversary bundle, the Princeton here, I'm not too happy with that as a tank platform, but the console on it is really creative, and honestly, I think if you're a tank player, this would be worth picking up just for the console Fractal Integrity Bleed. So what this console does is it takes a portion of your health and will deal that as damage to nearby foes. And honestly, if you have a really high hull capacity, you can get a ton of damage from this thing. So definitely check that out if you're on a tank. The Chekhov here is honestly probably the best science EPG platform we currently have in the Zen store. The Atlantis is the best energy weapon DPS platform currently in the Zen store, and I'm going to talk about it here in a minute. And then the Awani, that is just a ship that at this point everyone should have. That gets you the Type 7 pets, which are really good for the amount of debuff they bring in. And that is also the ship getting you the Fleet Power Network Array console, which provides you and your pets some haste for 35 seconds. And the haste that this provides, this can scale up based on your aux power, and it can go above the number shown on the tooltip here. So if you use a large Oxbat and OSS right before you hit this, you can get well over 125% haste from it. And that's also impacting your pets if you're on a carrier build. If you're on a support build, you can cast this onto the player you're trying to buff. It's just a console that everyone should have. The pets are really good. The Iwani, the Atlantis, the Chekhov, and the Princeton, there's value to all of them. So we're in a situation where basically everything added to the C store this year has value of some sort for different playstyles. And really, when we're in a situation like that, I think that the only winner I see here is us, the player base. Nearly everything good this year came from events and C store ships, whereas most of the past couple of years had so many of the best items locked behind lockbox or promo paywalls. So for this category in 2024, the best really depends on who's watching this video. I don't know what playstyle you have, but there's ships here for pretty much every playstyle. And with that, let's shift over to the best of for some specific categories in the C store. So if you're looking for an energy weapon DPS platform, then that is going to be the Atlantis here. That is a really strong ship in the current meta. That's got a 5-2 weapons layout plus experimental weapon, and it's got a very uncon friendly setup with a temporal and intel spec combo on it. So really good platform, and it is the best ship you can get in the C store if you're looking to do an uncon Voven meta build with energy weapons. Then for DPS accessories, that's of course going to go to the Iwani for the Fleet Power Network Array console and the Type 7 pets, and also the Achilles for the experimental weapon and the console that has. Now for tanking, that is going to be the Princeton for that Fractal Integrity Bleed console I showed. For EPG, that's going to be the Chekhov, the Lola, the Ralish you could also look at, and some of you might like the console off of the Premonition for EPG as well. So any of those four would be worth taking a look at. And if you're a carrier player, then definitely go for the Typhon. The trait from that is really good for carriers. And of course, the Iwani, the pets from that would be perfectly fine on a carrier as well if you're looking to buff up your team. But the console from that, regardless, is going to be really good for buffing up whatever pet you're using because it's making their weapons fire faster. So there's a lot of good ships in the store. And again, best DPS platform out of what they added is the Atlantis, and that includes all the premium ship offerings they put in this year. And my best ship of 2024 is the Iwani. The Fleet Power Network Array console off that and those Type 7 pets, they're truly a game changer, and they're the center piece of most builds nowadays. So the Iwani is the ship of the year, and the Atlantis is the DPS ship of the year. So hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. It's getting a bit late here and I'm starting to ramble. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. And that's going to be it for today. If you agree or disagree with what I said here, then leave a comment down below. I know someone's probably going to say I'm a shill for recommending so many C-store ships there, but I think that's a good way for the game to go. I like having all of the good ships in the C-store rather than in a bunch of lock boxes, because that gets really expensive. So I hope to see the C-store trend continue in 2025. But again, that's going to be it for today. Thank you to all channel members and viewers for the continued support. See you guys around.